While we get started, I always like to kind of start our day out with a little bit of a critical polling question, but I'm just going to do this one by put a comment in the chat. And I'd like to start out with who are you rooting for in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and why is it the Carolina Hurricanes? Everybody's thinking critically about that question. Oh man, we're going to have to mute Jeremy for the entire conversation because he obviously can't be trusted. Jeff's in the same boat. Oh, and I am aware that some of you are UK based, but we like to call people world champions in the US that only operate, if we're lucky, in North America. It's good to see that our chat is working. The other thing that I always like to point out to folks is you haven't been in one of our webinars before, you will see a Q&A panel up right as icon at the top. That's where you can put your questions. You put your questions there, and that way we can get to those at the end of the webinar. And in case we don't get to them, we're able to send you those follow-ups later on. The other thing I like to point out is the Q&A panel is a great way to make sure you don't forget about the question you had as we're moving through the deck. And sometimes we may try to answer some of those along the way. I mean, if we're going to go other sports, by the way, go Hawks. I am a diehard Seahawks fan, and so we had a good year. So we will move along. Just to reiterate for those that have joined us since, if we click on the view, if you're having any issues with the display, click on the view button at the top. And then from there, go to more options. And once again, it is add shared display. Should clear those up. You have your chance for retribution at the very beginning of the season, week 1, Steven. So we'll see you again. All righty, we'll go ahead and get started now. We're 4 minutes in, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time to get through the material and talk about your questions as well. So I'm Heath Madison. I'm our Senior Director of Professional Services. So everything we do proactive in nature at Trusted Tech. It's my responsibility to make sure you're getting what you need and you're happy at the end of the day. I see some familiar names, so it's great to see you all again. I am joined by Rick Belzer.
Oh,
he's a man of many words, as you can see. Rick Belzer is one of our cloud architects that specializes in these technology areas. Edwin.
Thanks, Steve. Hello, all. My name is Edwin Mlapas. I'm one of the frontline leaders here for our M365 and Azure teams. Looking forward to digging in with you all today.
Wonderful. What are we going to be talking about today? Well, we're going to start with kind of what we see as the new security landscape, what we're seeing in the industry, what's going on, where that risk lives today, how those things are shifting, how you can secure the modern work stack using Microsoft technologies, how we can turn those insights into action. And then we're going to have the Q&A session with Trusted Tech Experts. We're also going to have a little offer we'd like to provide everybody. We'll talk about that as well. So the new security landscape. This is what we're really going to start with. And in the new security landscape, I'm going to hand off to Edwin. But before I do, I have a little poll I like to bring up and just kind of see where you're at today. Where are you currently spending the most on your IT budget? Endpoint security, identity security, network perimeter security, or data security? We like to get a handle on this because it is going to kind of guide some of the conversation we're going to be having today. I see our first answers for endpoint. We got lots of endpoint security. That's very common. Yep. Very similar results I'd expect to see. So What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually hand it off to Edwin to kind of start talking about how we're seeing things shift over time.
Thanks, Heath. I appreciate that. Team, good morning. As Heath mentioned, one of the biggest shifts we're seeing organizations dealing with right now is that the way or the workplace has changed in a fundamental way, but many security models haven't quite evolved at the same pace. Users within organizations now operate across multiple devices, multiple endpoints, multiple locations, cloud platforms, collaboration tools, SaaS applications, and the list goes on. And increasingly AI-driven workflows all simultaneously. What that does is it creates a very, very different threat landscape than what most organizations were originally designed around. And I'm sure you all can share this sentiment. What we're finding is that AI accelerates two things. It accelerates both productivity, which is great, as well as exposure. And I think that's the important nuance here to pay attention to. Something Heath and I discuss almost weekly is that AI itself isn't inherently the problem. The challenge is that AI dramatically increases the speed at which information can be surfaced, summarized, searched, shared, and interacted with. So if an organization already has poor governance controls or weak visibility policies, all of those, that vulnerability will only compound over time. So if an organization already has oversharing or stale permissions, inconsistent governance, or weak access controls, AI attackers are leveraging AI for more sophisticated phishing, faster automation, improved evasion tactics. And that's why it's really for that concept that identity has effectively become the new security perimeter, where most modern attacks now don't quite originate outside of the organization. They start with compromised credentials, risky access, session hijacking, or privilege misuse. Next slide, please. So all of this to say, traditional security models were built around, I'm sure you all remember, a very, very different set of assumptions. The assumptions were users worked primarily inside the corporate network, infrastructure was centralized, devices were managed, and internally. What we're coming to find is that those assumptions don't really stand up or don't reflect how our organizations operate anymore. Today, the perimeter is effectively gone. Applications live everywhere, data lives everywhere, users operate from everywhere, and as we've been discussing, the rate at which data moves between places is only going to increase. And because of that, attackers don't necessarily need to break in the way they used to. In many cases, they simply log in, which is why most modern attacks focus so heavily on credential theft or phishing, token theft, session hijacking, or lateral movement across cloud identities and SaaS platforms, which means security can no longer just protect your network. Security now has to continuously validate the identity, the behaviors, the device, the access conditions, and the sensitivity of the data being shared. And that's really the foundation behind concepts like zero trust, adaptive access, conditional access, and continuous identity management or verification. So the three areas organizations really need visibility into today are identity, data, and user behavior, because risk often appears in behavioral patterns before it becomes a confirmed security incident. For example, unusual login activity, excessive downloads, abnormal sharing behaviors, privilege escalation, or access from unmanaged devices. Those are often early indicators of compromise or governance gaps, and for the most part, don't throw flags or suggest vulnerability in and of themselves. But when reviewed together or put together into a pattern, that's where the vulnerabilities or the gaps begin to show themselves. And one of the biggest operational challenges organizations face is really just understanding where sensitive data exists, who has access to it, how it's being shared, and whether those permissions still make sense, especially as collaboration and AI adoption continues to accelerate.
So
Thanks,
just
Heath. Back to you.
no, thanks, Edwin. So as we kind of dive a little bit more into where we see risk living today, um, I'd really like to hand off to Rick so he can kind of show what he sees going on with his customers as well.
Cool. Thank you, Heath. So when I'm stepping into a customer's environment, let's go ahead and go to my next slide here. Thank you. So when I'm stepping into a customer's environment, I'm basically mapping things out with these 4 quadrants. I'm going to look for overshared, poorly governed data, visibility for sensitive information, identity and access misalignment, and then finally compliance and monitoring. For the overshared and poorly governed data, this is a very common one. It's one I see all the time. And we're really the meat of this. We're talking about excessive permissions in SharePoint, Teams, and OneDrive. You all know there are probably rampant file shares going out there that you have no insight into and could end up being a vulnerability for you. Top right is figuring out where those shares are. It's visibility. Visibility and understanding is one of the things I'm going to talk about a lot throughout my slides later on. A lot of orgs just genuinely don't know where all of their critical data is and how it's traversing their network and environment. But AI unfortunately does, and it's trivial for AI to figure that out and find it. For identity
What
and
I always
misalignment-
say, just to add in real quick here, Rick, what I wanted to say is what you see, especially those above the lines, with that, or I would say a lot of the exposure, it's not malicious in nature. It's quite often it's unintentional. Someone put something somewhere just because they wanted to share it with someone easily. They weren't looking to like, ooh, how do I send this confidential privileged PII data out? And so they just moved it somewhere so they could share it with Joe from HR easier. And so what happens is as the AI, and that's where that AI tools, how it really increases that speed, because AI doesn't understand all he wanted to do was share it with Joe from HR more easily. It just knew that it has access to it. And so that's where these kind of things become critical, protecting yourselves from those unintentional vulnerabilities.
Yep, exactly.
Sorry to interrupt, Rick.
No, that's fine. That was a really good point. And that a lot of these tools with Purview, especially when we're talking about identity access and access misalignment, where these problems actually become risks isn't because the person or the situation had malicious intent behind it. It's just everyday production use, and turns out that actually is can end up being a very large risk. And for the identity and access, it's overprivileged accounts and weak conditional access. An example for that would be, orgs, you may have strong MFA methods like Authenticator, or even better yet, passkeys, but you're only forcing attestation against that every 30 days. If that one of those accounts gets compromised, an attacker can do a lot in 30 days, and chances are you're not going to know very much about it. And then last here is compliance and monitoring. One of the biggest pitfalls that I've seen over and over again is an organization adopts fancy new security service. They go through and they tick all those boxes for alerts. They send it to some distribution group or shared mailbox and call it a day. What ends up happening is all those alerts start flooding into that mailbox. Rules in Outlook are created within a week, and all of those alerts are never seen again. So I'm going to go further into what we can do about these remedying these issues a little bit later. But for right now, I'll kick it back over to Edwin, and he can talk about how we see these kind of manifest in our org day to day.
Amazing. Thanks, Rick. I think Rick touches on a really, really important concept here. And from what I'm seeing, one of the largest hidden risks in modern environments is, to Rick's point, stale and overexposed data. What we're finding is that most organizations, and I'm sure you all can speak from experience here, is that most organizations retain far more, significantly more data than they actively govern. Over time, and as organizations scale and mature, permissions expand, ownership disappears, duplicate files accumulate, and visibility declines, especially when you layer on top of that poor lifecycle management practices. The problem here is that outdated or forgotten data is still extremely valuable to attackers. And in many cases, the issue isn't the data itself, it's the exposure surrounding the data. And AI changes the equation here even further, because AI tools can surface exposed information dramatically faster than traditional search and discovery methods ever could, which is why governance, classification, retention policies, lifecycle management, as I alluded to, and access controls are now becoming foundational requirements, no longer just optional projects. Organizations need to understand not just what data exists, but whether that data should still exist, who has access to it, and whether those access patterns are still appropriate given the way that they operate today. Another major shift organizations are dealing with right now is that risk doesn't always originate externally anymore. A significant amount of exposure now comes from accidental oversharing, to Heath's point, compromised accounts, privilege misuse, or risky user behavior. And what makes insider risk particularly challenging is that it often initially presents itself as legitimate activity. A compromised identity can look exactly like a normal employee account. One phrase that I continue coming back to is that unintentional exposure without malicious intent can still be exploited by someone with malicious intent, which is why behavioral visibility matters so much. Organizations need the ability to identify unusual downloads or risky sharing behavior, abnormal patterns, and, like I said earlier, privilege misuse before those activities escalate into larger incidents. It's for this reason that modern security increasingly becomes more about understanding behavior and context in real time, beyond just detecting malware itself. And finally here, AI tools and third-party integrations are introducing an entirely new set or layer of operational risk. Every connected application, every plugin, integration, API, AI workflow potentially expands the organization's attack surface or vulnerability surface. Many of those tools require really or extremely broad API permissions and access scopes, which change over time. And in many organizations, adoption is moving much faster than governance. I think this applies to a lot of different areas for organizations, and that gap creates gaps in visibility. Organizations and IT leaders that we speak to often don't fully understand what these tools can access or what data they can surface, or how broadly those permissions have expanded over time, and ultimately how that information is being used, which is why security AI adoption really starts with identity governance, least privilege access, data classification, and continuous visibility. Because, like I mentioned earlier, if the environment is already over-permissioned or already poorly governed, AI simply amplifies those weaknesses.
So it's great to understand the why, and thanks, Rick, thanks, Edwin, for kind of going into the why and what we've been seeing. But it'd be really great to start talking about what we can do about it, right? It's not just about understanding, but how do we make sure we don't, become victims of it? And so I'd like to start out, before we get started in this next section, have another polling question. Promise I'm not going to polling question you to death. I would like to kind of see how you're using Microsoft Defender, if you are. So how would you define your current Defender licensing? We have a lot of users that are licensed and using. We have our fair share that are licensed for it because it's part of their license bundle, and then they're not using it. Other ones have no licenses for it. And other ones, maybe you're just not sure. So it'd be great to kind of understand what that is, because obviously that's one of the ways that we can help with those. And I understand Defender is also a pretty broad topic. But okay, so while everybody keeps answering that question, we're going to go ahead and get started on what you do about it. So I'm going to hand it back off to Rick.
Cool. Thank you, Heath. So a lot of people are paying for protection they're not fully utilizing. And that question about Defender is helping illuminate that. It looks like a little bit less than half of us in here are paying for Defender and utilizing it. I think that those numbers will go up significantly if we were to shift that question to Purview. And Purview has been kind of a black sheep in the stack for a while, but with AI and Copilot and everything, it's really come into a light of its own. So across the entire stack, though, what we're talking about here with endpoint security, Defender is one of the big ones, but we've also got Intune in the mix. And if you're not familiar with Intune, I don't think there's very many out there nowadays, but it's basically GPO for cloud. So GPO anywhere, no domain necessary. And it is also a fantastic platform. For identity security, we're talking about Entra, conditional access, identity protection, and privileged identity management. The big idea here for this one is we want consolidation. We don't want identity access management happening in 3 places. We want it happening in one, and then we want to secure that one place as best we can. This is going to help with overall security, but really more day-to-day and the most impactful one that it helps out with is MFA fatigue, reducing the amount of times your users have to pull out their phone to authenticate to get access to something they need to do for work. And then lastly,
But the other thing real quick, Rick, just because I interrupt occasionally, the thing that I see a lot too is people have Entra, right? They think, oh, I have Entra because I'm using M365. So you are technically using Entra. Now, what they're missing quite often is the additional things when it comes to login authentication fatigue that you can get by getting your SAML configurations in place for single sign-on, authentication to all apps, because we also know the more you have to log into multiple apps, the more you keep multiple sticky notes sitting under your keyboard. I did an exercise at a customer at one point, and I was on site, and we were talking about single sign-on. They said, doesn't that make me less secure if one login gets to everything? And I literally challenged them. I said, let's go around. I want you to pick 10 desks at random, and let's see if we can find a password. We found passwords at 6 of those 10 desks. And that was just a random sample. I could look really foolish if that didn't work out, but I was pretty confident that it would. And so that's just the way these are, human nature. And so that's where actually fully using and embracing Entra, more than just saying, well, we have a Entra directory for our 365. That's just what I wanted to add there, Rick.
No, yeah, thanks. And to kind of riff off of that too, he said the S word, SAML, and that can scare a lot of people because it's used at very high levels. But setting up SSO for the majority of your third-party services and SaaS services, Entra has out-of-the-box native integration for tons of them. So if you've got Box, if you've got Dropbox, or these random ERP sales platforms, chances are you can link your SSO into Entra in a matter of hours. So anyway, going back to the data security, which is really what the next few slides are going to dive into, which is the Purview stack. So let's keep going on there. So really quick check, and I thought about making this polling question, but how familiar here, you can just answer it to yourself, how familiar is everyone with Purview? Chances are there's a good amount of people that kind of have said to themselves, yeah, I've used it for e-discovery and litigation holds. That is by far the most common answer I hear. But Purview is something now, it's morphed and grown into something really powerful and all in of itself. Then we're going to use that for discovering data across the 365 stack, and then discovering, understanding, and securing through 365, Azure, endpoints, and even third-party solutions, which ties into that SSO, SAML. And because of that, one of the conversations that I've ended up having a lot lately here at Trusted Tech is a customer will come to us and say, hey, we're planning a Copilot rollout for later this year. What do we need to do to make sure we're safe and secure before we do this? And the very first thing that comes out of my mouth is, how much are you using Purview? And usually the answer is little to none. So the road to securing everything with AI in general is going to begin with Purview. It's the solution that is putting the guardrails in place to keep AI in check. And that takes us perfectly to the next slide. So breaking down Purview in 3 simple boxes. Super easy, I promise. Understand, secure, and control. Understand, we're talking about understanding and visibility. Purview audit and log for files. When we're talking about logging in Purview, it's important to know that data is classified in 3 states: at rest, in transit, and in use. Purview is able to classify or watch those files, and whenever its state changes, it makes a log of what happened in that state change. Once we get that logging in place, it's capturing a ton of meaningful information on all of the data in your environment. My favorite part of any Purview project lately has been that I get to play a little game where I tell the client, all right, we've been capturing all this data for 3 weeks. Now let's go in and find the weirdest thing that we possibly can. Oh, look, someone was accessing 800 files at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday every week for the last 6 months. That's a little weird. Let's look into it and see exactly what's going on there. I guarantee you there's some really strange things that you find when doing that. For secure, we're talking about protecting our data, and the big one here is automatically classifying and labeling your sensitive data. And I'm gonna go into that automatic word a little bit later. And then finally, control. And this is just governance. So this is what we're going to do. We've understood the data, we've secured the data, and we've labeled it, and we know what is important, what is risky, and where it lives. And now we're going to implement policies on what guardrails to put in place on that data.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Rick. Yeah. Product. I've gotten more and more excited about it as time has moved on, especially with the AI world rolling out. I actually am going to get to one of our Q&A questions now before we move on to the next section. And the question is, why does Trusted Tech think most customers are not using Purview? I would agree most people know of it, but are not really using it. I have my thoughts as well. But what I would say is this, and Edwin, Rick, feel free to jump in here on this. I think some of it is a lack of understanding, a lack of really knowing what it can do, and a perceived complexity. And what I mean by that is, first of all, Rick, spot on. People use it for a lot of compliance, litigation holds and stuff, because that's because a big portion of Purview has been around for many, I mean, decades with the Exchange Compliance Manager. And so people are familiar with that. I've been working with Exchange Compliance Manager for a very long time. And when Purview kind of became what it is today, it evolved from Exchange Compliance Manager was a big piece of it. And we put it under one umbrella, gave it a consistent name. So I think that's why people use that. When it comes to the other pieces, the data classification, I do think there's some of it that customers don't understand or see the value in DLP as a whole. And when they do, it makes them nervous because it is powerful. But not to quote a superhero movie, but with great power comes great responsibility. And when configured correctly and automated, it helps keep your environment secure. But people have a tendency to be a little bit averse to things that they are concerned about complexity and the potential outcomes if they do it wrong. That's where get with a partner like TrustedTech who does these kind of implementations day in, day out, and we can actually help you with some of those complexities, even just providing you guidance along the way. We actually do projects with customers every step, right? Sometimes they're like, here, just go get it done. Let me know when it's done. We set their classifications, we set their rules, we set their actions, we get all that in place. And there's other ones that, want to do it in-house, and we meet with them once or twice a week for a month, and then they do it themselves with our leadership and guidance. So find someone that you trust as a partner to get this right, and it's going to just greatly increase your security moving forward, especially if you want to do something like roll out Copilot. Did anything to add, Rick or Edwin?
Yeah, well, I mean, you kind of touched on it there early on, saying, one of the biggest hurdles with Purview is the complexity and the depth. I think to expand on that, another big thing that personally I found frustrating when working in Purview is it's constantly changing, especially over this last year. They've been rushing to get Purview tailored into AI tools. Last year I did a number of Purview projects, and throughout the year, the simple way of how I'm applying automatic labeling changed. A fundamental part of Purview, they updated it to their modern scheme. So that's been a source of frustration, especially recently. I think now the dust is settling, and they've got all of these major solution cards in place with the AI features hooked in and everything. Still plenty, right? But it's definitely gotten a lot better. And in years prior, it could be a frustrating experience.
Wonderful. And I'm going to hand it right back off to you. Just going to get us kicked off on this section, Rick.
Yeah. Thank you. So, yeah, this is actually another point that he's brought up there of DLP, and orgs maybe dip their toes in DLP and got burned. I've seen that a lot, and so with this, I'm going to try and talk about DLP that actually works. And if you haven't seen this episode before, here's a quick synopsis. DLP policy gets enforced, and users then complain that their productivity is being impacted. The policy quietly, or sometimes not so quietly, gets rolled back, and then nobody ever opens that admin page or solution card ever again. DLP is forgotten, and it's considered a failure. The reason that happens is because it's very easy to go from 0 to 100 with DLP. And the approach that I've had the most success with is taking a very soft touch with it. And I would go so far as to say the most effective and best DLP rollouts that I've seen have actually started by doing absolutely nothing at the very start. Rolling out your DLP, and it does nothing. But what it does do is capture data and gives you the ability to say, well, what if we did something here? There's a lot of power in seeing those simulation reports and seeing, hey, this person moved this many files over from here to here, and what if we had a DLP policy that did this and restricted that? What would they see? What would we see? And how would that be handled? Every DLP policy, one of the title up on the card right now is a balance between security and productivity. That is the #1 focus with DLP. You need to balance security and productivity. If you jump the gun and shoot for the moon with security, you're going to end up having a bad time. Users will revolt, and yeah, you'll never want to touch that ever again. Once you do have that understanding of how the data moves, you can then hone in on the actual high-risk data in your environment and start implementing, again, with a soft touch and protecting the sensitive information, governing, saying we want encryption on this. We're not going to block people from sending this, but we're going to make sure that it's encrypted or that it's got a lifecycle management on it to where that link expires, etc. And then lastly, we've got sweet automation. Automation is one of my favorite words in Purview, and there's a lot of ways to do it. And automation is the key for all of these solution cards that I'm talking about today. And we're going to go in with that here. So we're going to talk about information protection and classification. The biggest one to talk about here is sensitive information. And that's where we have basically sensitive, when we talk about sensitive information, we're talking about II information, payment information, addresses, social security. Some industries have direct compliance laws that dictate what they should and shouldn't do about this. A lot don't. But with AI, it's becoming pretty darn important to get a handle on where that data lives and what your users are doing with that data. And this is where our friends sensitive information types, trainable classifiers, and exact data matching can come in and help us out. So with those in place, they lead us to automatic labeling. And if you're unfamiliar with automatic labeling, I'm going to walk through a little scenario here that hopefully will catch up to speed. So let's say I'm a lone IT admin at a small business with a couple hundred users. I go into Purview and I publish 3 labels: public, confidential, and highly confidential. Those are my 3 tiers that I want. And I can then go in and associate a sensitive information type called US credit card information and tell Purview that, hey, when you find US credit card information, slap a confidential label on that. Great, that's in place. I go about my day. Now let's switch over to a completely fictional user named Dave. Dave just submitted a purchase order and then went on vacation. We all know that guy. Dave's boss goes to process the purchase order and he notices that it's missing payment information. So he calls Dave up on his vacation, says, hey man, I'm sorry to bother you, but the purchase order you submitted doesn't have payment method. Can you get that to me? Dave isn't thrilled, but he says, sure. He calls the client up and the client gives him their credit card number. Dave types it up into his Outlook on his phone and sends an email on over to his boss with the credit card number in it, sends it off, and Dave's happy, gets to go back to his beach. Except the Purview policy that we put in place actually popped up with a banner and said, hey, we've detected sensitive information on this email. I'm going to let you send this email, but I'm going to add encryption to it, and I'm going to add an expiration date to it. So 14 days from now, this email is going to go poof. What that did is that saved Dave from sending a client's financial credit card information over plain text unencrypted email, which if you aren't sure why that's a really bad thing, I'm sure we've got another webinar coming up that can go into all the reasons and pitfalls around that. But the point here is that automatic labeling can be a very powerful tool within the Purview set. And it can do a lot more than just encrypt emails. So one of the big things too here is that when automatic labeling applies a label, it's applying that label to the file, not the repository, not where the file lives. So it's instantly much better than your traditional permissions. That label lives on the file, so even if that file goes down to a desktop, that label is still there. And that makes it much more resilient, which is exactly what we want for those guardrails for AI. So pivoting a little bit here to insider risk. I'm actually going to go back to my friend Dave here. Aside from his bad email habits, he also happens to sign into his work email on the PC that his kids also use in the living room, that his kids play Roblox on, that his kids maybe have infected half a dozen times over with malware. So it's not a big step to assume that Dave's account is probably going to get compromised at some point. And when that happens, it's very likely, as Edwin and Heath touched on earlier, that account could present itself as normally functioning. It could take us a while to actually figure out that account is compromised. And during that time, this threat actor has lateral access to everything that Dave has, which, as we figured out earlier, is sensitive client information, payment information, credit cards. So when we're talking about insider risk, we're talking about accounts doing unusual behavior. For instance, Dave's account gets compromised, and a couple weeks go by, and then we get an alert that shows that Dave just tried to download 500 gigs of customer information from one of our SharePoint sites. Fortunately, Purview blocked it and said, this is highly unusual. I'm not going to allow that. But then shortly thereafter, he then tried to share out a root directory of a SharePoint site to some sketchy email that we've never heard of and have no idea about. At that point, Entra went ahead and stepped in and said, I don't really like this. I'm going to go ahead and lock your account down. So Dave's locked out, and his would-be end of compliance terror is cut short. Thanks to behavior monitoring. In that example, if Dave was actually trying to download those files, I think we still want to know, right? Why is Dave suddenly trying to download 500 gigs of customer information? So having these rules set in place benefits us even in normal day-to-day operations as well. Now we can go to the next one. Thank you. And then, so the last part here, collaboration. So collaboration is where we see kind of all of this come into play day to day. Sensitive information is constantly moving across email, chats, meetings, workspaces, and involving and being involved with external collaboration. So we really, when we're looking at how our org is utilizing the collaboration tools, that's when we really start to see gaps in our governance. The first one that we want to look at is Exchange. We want to reduce phishing, spoofing, malicious attachments. All of that stuff is well under the Defender umbrella. And for Purview's part, we've got a fantastic Purview message encryption now. Used to be Exchange or Outlook message encryption. Now Purview. It's the same thing, but you do have to set it back up. And we can also monitor and watch for risky emails going out. Once we have some automatic labeling in place, we can easily bring up a report and say, who is sending out emails that contain the most sensitive information? And if there's some clear front runners, we can go and have a discussion with them and say, why are you doing this? And if there's legitimate business reason, maybe we need to implement some controls and some policies to help keep that secure. The second one is SharePoint and OneDrive. Getting things labeled is the biggest step forward here. It goes for both sensitivity and lifecycle management. The last thing you want is to be staring at a red usage bar in your SharePoint admin center. That additional SharePoint storage gets very expensive very fast. So starting looking at lifecycle management and labeling those files to where you're transitioning files from SharePoint to Azure files to blob storage, wherever, starting that early is going to save you some money in the long run. And then lastly, Teams. The most important thing here, I would say, if you have not already, make sure you're going into your Teams admin center and looking at what your policy is for approving applications. Users love to add little applications to their teams. When they're bored, sitting on a meeting that they're not talking about, they're going to be rooting around, seeing what little fun productivity tool they can add. Some of those tools might ask for ridiculous tenant-wide permissions, and we obviously do not want to be granting those. One quick aside here for SharePoint and Teams, there was a thing called, or is this thing called SharePoint Advanced Management Tools in the SharePoint Admin Center. It used to be a paid service, and Microsoft actually gave it to everyone last year for free with the big rollout, or last year, sometime after Copilot came out. They basically said everyone needs this. So if you haven't gone in there, I would encourage you to go in, check it out. It gives some really great tools for governance and management over SharePoint and Teams sites. So I'm sure everyone probably is aware that you've got several hundred M365 groups or teams kicking around your tenant, gathering cobwebs. That tool set can help keep a handle on that. And lastly, this is a good overview of the steps that you want to take for starting this journey into securing your modern work stack. If you take nothing else from my part today, you want to just look at these steps. Finding a middle ground between security and productivity. And that middle ground starts with understanding and visibility. You need to understand what data you have in your environment, who is using that data, and why they're using that data, and how they go about moving it and interacting with it. Start there, and the policies will end up writing themselves. Admittedly, licensing can make this path a lot easier. Automatic labeling is not included in E3, for example. Microsoft recently introduced some good step-up offers to pick up automatic labeling without going straight to E5, which I'm very grateful
We
for.
do have a few quick slides on licensing here that'll help, but
Yep.
Understanding the licensing is a great way to go. And so, because I noticed, by the way, some of the comments about why customers aren't using Purview even include things about the cost. We find a lot of our customers don't realize is they already have licensing. We can go to the next slide. They already have licensing around Purview as part of maybe their business premium subscriptions that they have today. And so I'm going to hand this off to Edwin to give us a quick rundown of some of these licensing pieces.
Yep, thanks, Heath. You're exactly right. Without launching a formal polling question, I'd be willing to wager that the majority of you run one of these 3 licenses as your primary license type within your organizations. Now, it's for that reason that one of the conversations we're having constantly right now is what security and compliance capabilities are organizations already paying for, and where are the actual gaps? And the reality is, to Rick's point, is that Microsoft security stack has matured significantly over the last several years, and a lot of organizations already own meaningful security and governance capabilities today. They just haven't fully operationalized them yet, which is exactly what Rick and Heath are alluding to. The important thing to understand here is that these licensing tiers are less about good, better, and best, or feature set, graphics or spreadsheets, and more about organizational maturity, complexity, and risk profile. Now, when it comes to the business premium, it's truthfully a very strong security foundation for small to mid-sized organizations. I think this packs the strongest smile per mile when it comes to any other license. You're going to be getting core productivity, Intune, baseline endpoint protection, and foundational device management and access controls. So like I was mentioning, for organizations with 300 users and below, it is significantly more capable than most people realize. Now, the E3, that's where kind of the fun starts, typically where organizations begin maturing operationally around governance, compliance, and identity. This is where we start to see broader DLP strategies and stronger access controls, legal retention policies, rights management, and more scalable policy enforcement. For many organizations, the E3 becomes the operational baseline for enterprise-level security and compliance. Now, when we get to the M365 E5, that shifts into advanced visibility, automation, and threat protection. So it's at this point that organizations gain access to Defender XDR, advanced identity protection, insider risk management, automated compliance capabilities, and deeper threat analytics. Typically, organizations move into the ME5 when regulatory requirements increase, threat exposure increases, or operational complexity begins outgrowing baseline controls. And the good news is Microsoft bakes in a lot more flexibility than organizations realize when it comes to moving up or trading up in license type. There's a lot more functionality there and a lot more promotional benefits when it comes to moving into the different tiers. And ultimately, security maturity shouldn't be driven purely by licensing, like I mentioned earlier. The licensing here enables the initial strategy, but the real objective is in reducing operational risk while still enabling collaboration and productivity. Now, one important update worth calling out here is that Microsoft has continued to strengthen or rethink the security story around the business premium. There's sometimes a misconception that the business premium is a lightweight SMB productivity SKU, but from a security standpoint, it's actually become a very capable foundation. Now, just to be clear, the Microsoft Defender has not been removed from the business premium. Core protections around endpoint detection and response, threat and vulnerability management, attack surface reduction, and Intune-based device management remain fully intact, included. But what Microsoft has really done is create a more modular or systematic path for organizations that need more advanced enterprise-grade security and compliance capabilities without needing to do a full overhaul or a full upgrade into the ME3 or ME5. So now organizations can selectively expand into areas like Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, Defender for Office, Defender for Identity, Defender for Cloud Apps, Entra ID P2, and to Rick's point, the full Purview suite without necessarily needing to jump directly into the full ME5. And truth be told, that flexibility matters a lot more with the emergence of AI. Some organizations that we're seeing need stronger identity governance, better email protection, or more advanced compliance controls before doing a full upgrade. Now, as organizations continue scaling security, governance, and AI initiatives, the conversation naturally evolves into how the broader Microsoft 365 licensing stack aligns to operational maturity. Now, one thing Heath and I and Rick as well work to help organizations avoid is evaluating these licensing tiers purely from a feature checklist perspective. The reason for that is the question is not which SKU has more features, but which capabilities align to the organization's operational complexity, security requirements, compliance posture, and AI strategy. Now, like I had mentioned before, you have the M365 E3, that is your operational baseline, core productivity, foundational security, and enterprise-level collaboration that begins to emerge. Moving into the E5, last note here is that the E5 moves organizations further into advanced threat protection and automation. And the last note I'll mention with the E7 is that this is a very, very clear signal for as to where Microsoft believes the market is headed. The focus moves beyond protecting users and devices and more towards governing AI agents, automation, identity orchestration, and machine-driven workflows at scale.
E7 is great, but you need to make sure you're going to use it. That's what I always say about E7. Microsoft also has some very friendly pricing to get folks onto that these days. So what are we talking about here, and what's kind of our offer for attending the webinar? So just so you know, we do have an offer around a threat protection and visioning workshop. And this is all about really helping you get a handle on your environment. What threats exist? What do we need to, what protection should you put in place? So we're really looking for vulnerabilities. We're looking for threats. We're getting to know you. We're getting to know your environment. And actually, start to finish, between the bake-in time of the tools, gathering data, that's 2 weeks minimum. Everything else, it'll take about a month, but at the end of that month, you will have a good handle from a strategy going forward. We'll deliver that to you. We'll deliver some training. We'll demo some different tools. So it's a pretty robust kind of offering. Usually, our customers pay a minimum of $2,000 for it, depending on what we can get from Microsoft. Even if we get max funding from Microsoft, $2,000. For attending today, we are waiving that $2,000. So we will target whatever we can get from Microsoft, and quite possibly you can have this entire engagement 100% free to you. No promises, but really it's all about really understanding your environment, knowing what your roadmap, knowing what your path forward is. And you can take that and do that in-house. You can use us too. It's up to you in that matter. If we can go to the next slide, because I want people to have an opportunity. So if you want to learn more about this, if you want to really get a handle, better understand what your priorities are, what are your potential threats that we need to mitigate, better understand and prioritize remediation of those vulnerabilities, all that, click sign up now. This isn't an obligation. I'm not going to be a sales guy and try to pitch you on it, but we will go after Microsoft for the funding. And it is potential that this is a completely free engagement for you. Even what we normally would charge above and beyond is waived for attendees of this webinar. I know we're at time, but I want to get to some of these questions. So when it comes to Priva, one of the things I wanted to talk about is, yeah, it's AI. And we all know with AI, there's some potential for some false positives. Third-party PII is actually detected within it out of the box. It's using like Azure AI and pieces like that. It does a pretty good job. Is it going to get you 100% of the way there? No. I always kind of subscribe to the 80-20 rule. I think it gets us 80% of the way there. That other 20%, that's where we start customizing, looking at the false positives, looking at the misses, and we kind of adjust from there. But it does do a pretty good job right out of the box. Also, email and Teams, all our documents are kept on premise. Yes, there's actually an information protection scanner that you deploy on site, and so that it's on premise, and then you can actually extend your Purview capabilities to your on premise workloads. So that's one thing I always say. So now you can actually extend that to what you have there. So it does a great job. Hopefully I got through that question and got to the answer you needed. And let's see what else we got here. All right. I thought I'd seen one about the Admin 365, which I'm assuming you're talking about the new admin portal for Microsoft 365. Purview, you can get to it from that, but I like to use the actual Purview portal. Gives me full capabilities. It's kind of like saying, can you manage SharePoint from within the admin center? They're expanding it and making that easier, but I like to go to the dedicated portal for it. That might be just because I've been doing this way too long. And so I'm a little bit old school on some of those things. There's that question. Yeah, so Business Premium actually has some of the capabilities of Purview within Business Premium. It has DLP, email, for instance, is covered. To extend some of the other things, that's where you need some of the enhanced add-on capabilities, and that is done as a per user basis. Will the slide deck be shared? We do share the video recording with attendees as part of our follow-up communications. If you sign up for the workshop, you should hear back from us very soon to get something scheduled to kind of talk about your specific requirements. Because even with that workshop, there's up to 6 optional modules, 2 mandatory modules. We want to make sure we're picking the right free modules that make sense to you, or if you want all 6. There's even questions about we can actually do some readiness and give you actually training around different products. So we just kind of need to figure out what your requirements are, and that's what that'll come from. Alrighty, that was the fastest round of Q&A. Obviously, feel free, if you have any other questions, reach out to your account manager, reach out to your account executives. They can get you in contact with us. Click that button that we had up to schedule the workshop. You'll get a link to that in follow-up emails as well. Just reach out, and we're happy to jump on the phone. We love to talk tech. So we're happy to jump on a call with you. Thank you, everybody, so much for your attendance. I appreciate the questions. It's always nice. You never know when you're going to get to the Q&A, and we hope it's not empty. So thank you for being engaged throughout the entire process, and we hope to see you on the next one.